Hey, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and I'm back with video number 6 in my Butterick 6214 video sew-along series. As you can see, I'm wearing the top that I've been making on this sew-along series along with you all. So that should give you a hint to let you know that I'm done filming the entire video series and I've actually finished editing the footage. And what we are going to end up with, I was hoping it was just going to be one more video, this one, but there's actually 2 more videos. So this is video number 6. Then we have a 7 and an 8. So if you're catching the video sew-along series, know that you should be looking at a playlist of a total of 8 videos, where in those 8 videos, I show you how to go from beginning to end on how to make this simple top. Now, as you've noticed, the videos are quite long and there's a lot of content being covered. So that should give you a little hint into the complexity and the amount of knowledge that you need to have before you start jumping right into more complex garment sewing projects. This is the simplest top that I could find, and I've done 8 videos and they're almost all 30 minutes long. There's hours upon hours of footage of me walking you through and teaching you how to do this. So for those of you that are asking for even more information, like how to fit your specific body and things, there's no way that I can cover that in this sew-along series. So this sew-along is more about getting you to understand a pattern, cut the pieces that you need out of your fabric correctly, and put it together. So if you're someone who's not yet sure on what size to choose in the Butterick 6214 pattern, my recommendation for you is go back, watch videos 3, 4, and 5. Choose the finished measurements that you think you would like. I would say go a little bit bigger than your body measurements so you know you have some wiggle room in that top and it's not going to fit you too small. If it's a little bit bigger, it'll just be a little bit easy or breezier and airy so you can use it as a bathing suit cover-up, which I do with the larger one that I ended up making, and you can still wear it. As long as you end up with something wearable, or at least a starting point where you see these are the mistakes that I made, but I now know how to correct them in the next try that I give this pattern, okay? So that's what we're trying to do with this sew-along series. Thank you to all of you who have posted comments, who have been anxiously awaiting the last 3 videos of this sew-along series. I cannot wait to see your finished tops. So now let's jump right into the video. We're gonna pick up where we left off and I will meet you back at the end. I hope you enjoy it. So now let's move on to making a couple more marks and then finally we'll get to sewing. Now I'll go back and make some reference points, and I will be completely honest with you, I often will not even make these marks, but if you're a beginner, let's cover it. We're messing with the sleeve piece first. We've cut out all our notches, which we did that when we cut, but you'll see here there are some little dots. This is a circle, then it has an M, this circle has an S, and this one has an XS. So these are your different sizes, the same way that we have the different cut lines that are different. So I'm working with the medium, so here is my medium circle. So we'll need to mark this from the pattern piece in the location where it is, but onto the fabric. A ton of different ways of doing this. If I do mark it, this is how I do it. I take a big pin and I just have, it's kind of like a corsage pin here, and I poke it through the pattern piece, through the fabric layers in both locations. Then I'll take my water-soluble fabric marking tool, whatever your favorite tool is. For these things, because the marks are so small, I like to use the ones that are markers. If you're using something that's kind of like a chalk marker like this is too wide for me to really make an accurate mark. So I recommend something like this. Now, the pin is going through both fabric pieces, so I'm going to mark it on both of my sleeve pieces, which is what you need to do, but on the wrong side of the fabric, which is what I'm looking at. If you cut the fabric pieces like I showed you, this is another reason we fold the fabric onto itself with pretty sides of it touching, so that now when we make these marks, we don't have to move pattern pieces, you don't have to do anything. It's already facing you in the wrong side of the fabric where you want to make your mark. So now I just slide the tissue paper back, and where the pin is entering this top layer, I'll make my mark. Then I flip this to the back side, and where the pin is exiting the back fabric, I make my mark. And that's my quick and easy way, how I prefer to do it, to mark this one center mark on both wrong sides of my pattern template quickly and easily. So that's one. You're going to repeat that on the opposite side because we have another one right there. And then we have another one at the center here at the top. So I'm still with the medium, poke it right through the center when it's a larger circle so I can have it be a little bit more accurate. And just somewhere there so that you know that that's the center of the sleeve cap there. All right, so we have 1, 2, and 3. They've been marked. All my notches have been clipped. I have no other markings that need to be marked here. So at this point, you could take away your pins or weights or whatever you had on it and set them aside. Even if I don't have any pins on it like this, I will still keep it with the pattern piece. Because when you start making garments that have a ton of other pieces, you can often get confused with all kinds of little odd-shaped chunks if they're not still stuck together with the pattern piece. So now let's move on to the front and see what markings we need to transfer over on this piece. Up here by the shoulder, if you come down where the sleeve is going to be inserted, you'll find those same little circles. So I'm with the medium here. So let me grab my pin, insert it at the medium, and mark it here and on the back layer as well. There. And then just have a look around. No other markings here. So that one's done. Here you'll see some other little circles, but these are not going to be reference points that are going to affect our pattern piece. Instead, it says 4C left side, and you'll see these 2 dots, and these are for the pocket placement. Remember we had a view on here that view C has a pocket placed on it? Those are your reference points on where to line up the pocket, but since we're not doing that, we don't care about it. Now let me grab piece number 3, which is the back, and see what marks I need to make here as well. If you notice, since you had marks on the sleeve, you're going to have marks in the arm's eye or the arm opening of your top, because those are going to be helpful to help you ease in the sleeve when you go to attach them. And here it is. Again, grab a little pin at the medium point. For me, insert through both layers and mark. Now that all our marks have been transferred to the wrong side of our fabric, let's go back to the instruction sheet. You have a glossary here with some terms that you may want to read if you've never done any of these before, because when they're used then in the instruction step, that's where the definition is. So sometimes people read the instructions and they have no idea what it means, and they think that the pattern company is assuming they know what it is, but it's giving you the definition here. Granted, that doesn't mean much to a lot of people, because sometimes the description or the definition of what that specific step or technique is doesn't make much sense to beginners anyway. But no worries, because in this sew-along, I'm going to walk you through all of it. So first, where you begin the first step for the directions, it says front and back, and so tops A, B, C, and D. So all our instructions are going to begin here. Front and back. It's telling you view C. Now you see it says something about doing something with the pocket. We're not doing a pocket, so just skip all that. So now we can go to the next step, and you'll notice it says all views. Stitch front, number 2, to back, number 3, and these numbers reference the pattern piece, okay, at shoulders and sides. And we're going to stitch them along the top shoulder seams here and along the side seams here. Now notice, if you look at the illustration, we see little triangles here, here, and we see a single, a double triangle, and all those little things are notches. Remember, we cut into the fabric instead of out? So your pattern pieces, if you copy the way that I did it, are not going to have these little triangles sticking out. Instead, you're going to have little tiny slits into the fabric at those points. But they're just reference points. So here's a rule of thumb. Typically, when you see one notch, that references something on the front of the body. When you see double notches, that references something on the back of the body. So if you notice back here, there's a double notch, and back there, there's a double notch. But in front of it, there's 1 and 1. And that means that the single notch is on the front of the body. And we know that to be correct because number 2 is right here. And our number 2 pattern piece is the front of the body. Does that make sense? Then where the double notches are on the other one that you see is kind of that shaded gray fabric that's in the back layer there, that's number 3, which is the back of the garment. All right. So we're going to grab our fabric and we're going to sew along the top shoulder seams to connect the front to the back and along the side seams. So now, what does that mean? That means that now you need to set up your sewing machine with, if you're using a rayon challis, I like to use a 70-10 sewing machine needle. A universal works fine. 80-12 would be okay too. Make absolutely sure you have a new needle in here. If you've never worked with rayon challis before, if it snags or it pulls, or you say you pin the fabric through and you're using some rusty pins, you are not going to be happy because it'll wreck your fabric. So sharp pins and a sharp new universal 70-10 needle. And then load it up with the coordinating polyester thread that you're going to be using for your project. And I'm going to be doing navy for mine. And then we're going to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. How do we know that? Well, generally for all commercial sewing patterns, that's going to be the seam allowance. And again, they give you the info. You see it up here at the sewing information. It's the first thing you see. 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters seam allowances are included unless otherwise indicated. Sometimes there'll be like a little piece that you need to stitch down or baste, and it will say in the step like only use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance or 1/4 of an inch. Where it does not mention seam allowance, you will be using 5/8 of an inch because that is what has been allotted into the pattern piece. So when we sew this piece that we cut out on the medium line is already, or it already has 5/8 of an inch added to it, right? That after you sew 5/8 of an inch, then it's going to finish where it needs to finish for the specific size medium that we're cutting out. Before I head over to the machine, I'm just going to remove any pins I have on here. And I only have pins in here because I transported this since I've been working on it for several days and weeks now for you all. I just didn't want to lose the pieces or nothing. So I can remove the pattern piece. I know this is pattern piece number 3. Okay. Remove the pins from the front and from the sleeve as well, because now we're done with the pattern piece for now, unless you're making adjustments to it at home. A lot of you have been asking me about making adjustments to bust versus waist, hip. Guys, those are super, super in-depth long classes. People pay thousands of dollars for a weekend-long course to learn how to custom fit their specific and unique body. This sew-along is not that. I just want you all to jump in, learn the basics, make one. If it's a little bit bigger than your body measurements, do it. I just want you to make something that's wearable so you can then move on. So let's put these pattern pieces aside. And now we're working with fabric. So your front and back pieces are going to be matched up at the shoulder seams. So slide this one down. You can see this dips lower. That's my front. I'm going to put the back piece on it, pretty sides touching here. And you'll see that if I split the fabric like this, it opens up where the notch is. So at the shoulder seams, the idea is that you match up the one notch from this piece with the notch from that one. And you can see that just by making those little slits, it's super easy, and I know exactly where I need to match things up. All right, so shoulders done. Now we're going to just come right down here and pin down the side seam. You'll see that I match up here and here, and there are some double notches right here that need to be matched up. You see how I'm doing that? Match up your notches, I should say, because there's double ones there, and just pin along the length of the side seam. So now that I've pinned here along the shoulder and then down the side on this side, this is how I like to pin. I'm going to flip the shirt over and do the same thing. And the reason for that is that instead, if I were to keep it like this, and I've pinned along there and there, if I come back and pin there and there, I'm going to be sewing with the bulk of the fabric on the inside of the throat space, and it's uncomfortable, and it's not going to be, if you're used to sewing, I should say, and you have good sewing habits, it's not going to be in the most comfortable orientation. So instead, flip it over so that, again, I'm pinning from the top in the same way that I just pinned the other side. And that may not make any sense because oftentimes my students have no idea why I'm doing that until they get to the sewing machine, and then they're like, oh, wow. It definitely helps. So pin along the shoulder and down the side seam on this side as well. All right, so I'll grab this, my needle, my thread, and let's set up the sewing machine. So I have my thread, my bobbin, everything is in, the needle, and now you need to set up some type of a guide here that's going to give you 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. What that means is that where the needle comes down into the fabric to stitch needs to be exactly 5/8 of an inch in from the raw cut edge of your fabric piece. So you can use a seam guide or the throat space on your machine if it has the markings, and mine does. So I'm going to line up the edge of the fabric on 5/8, and of course, every sewing machine is going to be different. So if you're watching this, I'm assuming that you have some type of sewing experience and know how to find your own seam allowance guide. So I just do 1 or 2 back stitches right at the end, making sure that I'm maintaining the seam allowance along the whole shoulder seam here where I need to sew. So that's been sewn. Now we're going to come along the side seam. So remember, I pinned this way. Now I'm going to just turn this and start stitching here along the side. Straight down. All right. Now, remember I said sew 1 shoulder seam, and in the same side of the piece, sew that side seam. Now we flip this over, and now it's oriented exactly again like what we just did. So again, I'll do the shoulder seam and down the side of this opposite side. So now we're going to be at this step, step 6, where we've sewn the front and the back together. You keep coming down, and now it's walking you through all the steps in the instruction sheet for how to attach the contrast hemband, which we can skip because we didn't do that. So all this can be skipped, all this, all this. Now when you come to step 14, it says stay stitched the neck edge of the top. I will often do this even before I sew the shoulder seams and side seams like we did here, but I'm going to show you how to do it now. And it's in bold and capital letters. It says stay stitch. If you don't know what that is, remember there's a glossary here. If we reference it, it says stay stitch is stitch 1/8 of an inch from the seam line in the seam allowance. So usually about 1/2 of an inch from the raw edge. So what does that mean? The seam allowance when we attach the bias neck binding is going to be at 5/8 of an inch. So the reason you're stay stitching only 1/2 of an inch in is because you don't want the stay stitching to show on the outside of your top. It's simply in place to kind of keep this rounded cut edge, which is cut on the bias, from distorting. What you don't want to do is start yanking and pulling on this because you'll totally distort the entire neckline. So this is what the stay stitching step is going to help us do. And a quick note, even though the pattern says 1/2 an inch, go ahead and stitch it at 3/8 of an inch, because since we're using store-bought bias tape, in a future step, the 3/8 inch stay stitching will help us line up the neck binding. Ideally, you would press this shoulder seam towards the back of the top, which is going to be this way. So because I'm not pressing yet, and I mean, and there's so many different ways of doing this and what order you want. Because it's telling us to stay stitch now, I'm just going to do this. So I'm going to stitch it with the seam allowance pointing or lying towards the back of the top. I'm only stitching through 1 layer. You're not stitching anything together. You're just stitching to help those stitches hold this curved edge of the neckline. Now, I'm not pulling on it. If you pull, it's going to distort. So the idea is keep the fabric flat, let the sewing machine pull it through so that it's helping keep that curve just as it was cut without stretching it. Don't stretch. I tend to stretch stuff a lot, so I have to constantly just be working with my fingertips to remind myself. So let me show you on the wrong side so you can see it on a lighter fabric with the darker thread so it shows up what I did. This is the front of the top. This is the back of the top. All we did was stitch along the curve opening of the neckline. Easy. So the stay stitching on the neck edge of the top have been done. Now it's moving on to having you finish with the bias tape the neckline. I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to skip over to the sleeves, and then we'll save the neck edge and how to bind the neck opening for the last step. And so because one doesn't have anything to do with the other, you can feel free to do whichever one you want first. So again, this is something that comes with time and preference as far as the steps. So okay, step 22 for views C and D, which are the ones with sleeve options, that's what we're doing. It says stitch the sleeve seam. So the short sides of the seam. So let me show you how to do that. So we can put away the front and the back. Separate your 2 sleeve pieces. Put them like this, one at a time. And you're just going to bring the short ends together, pretty sides touching. And there will be a notch right there that you can match up. It's such a small seam that I'm not even going to put a pin. But now remember, when it comes to construction, which this is a construction seam here, we're putting the sleeve together, the seam allowance needs to be 5/8 of an inch again. So let me go back to that. 5/8 of an inch, stitch it down. That's one sleeve. We'll do the same thing to the other. Match my notch. Okay, 2 sleeves done. Now, if you're still following with the sleeve directions, you'll see that after you sew it up at the short seam like we just did, now it tells you to make a 5/8 of an inch narrow hem at the lower edge of the sleeve. So for this, you could fold this bottom and the bottom part of the sleeve. The curve is going to be inset into the body of the actual top. And the part that's flat like this down here is where the hem is going to be. This is the part that hangs on the edge of your shoulder, your arm, okay? Depending on the length of the sleeve. And so it's going to be up to you. At this point, I usually will get an iron and press this seam open, but I can just finger press it and finger crease it here for you all now. But this bottom straight edge here needs to be hemmed. And so what they mean by 5/8 of an inch is that you want to do a narrow hem, which is small, so that the fabric is going to get folded once in and towards the wrong side of the fabric, and then again. And the idea is that both of those folds equal the 5/8 of an inch. So unless you wanted to sit there with a seam gauge and press this in place, you could go by little and use some basting glue and press it into place to hold the hem a little bit and then a little bit more. And it's basically going to be just a hair over 1/4 of an inch each time. So say 1/4 of an inch, and if you folded it again, 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 and 1/4 is 1/2 of an inch, and 5/8 of an inch is just 1/8 more than that. So if you are doing this by hand, kind of manually like this, I would turn under 1/4 inch and then another 1/4 inch. You would have to pin it really well or glue baste it or something to hold that consistently the whole way around the bottom hem of the sleeve. Or if you have a machine that has some different accessories and different specialty presser feet, you could install a narrow hem foot. Now these, you're going to have to either look in your accessory bin for your specific sewing machine, check the user manual, see if there's some optional accessories that you can purchase that will do this. And I will tell you straight up, it takes a little bit of time to figure out how to work the narrow hem foot on these machines. I've already used mine a ton, so I know how to do it, but this is not a tutorial on how to do this. So if you're going to do it manually, remember, press 1/4 inch and then another 1/4 inch so that you're concealing all the raw edges. And I'm going to be able to do that here using this really narrow hem foot. Now I can't remember if this machine came with this foot or if I purchased it separately. You can always go online and do some research, go into your local sewing machine dealer as well, and ask them what narrow hem foot they have for your specific make and model of your sewing machine. And they sell a ton of these, and they come in different widths. I want to say this is 5mm or 4mm. I'm not sure, but it's really, really narrow. So if it's going to be, I think, less than the 5/8 of an inch, which is okay. The pattern is just telling you 5/8 as a starting point, and if you want the sleeve to finish the same height. For me, I don't really care. I just need the bottom raw edge here hemmed somehow. So whether the sleeve is a little bit, 3/8 of an inch longer, 1/4 of an inch longer than it's supposed to be, doesn't really matter to me. So don't feel like you have to do everything super, super specific to what the pattern is telling you, as long as you end up with the same result. So the result here is we need to hem our sleeves, and that is what we're going to do with this little foot here. And I like to start under the underarm. I'm going to start before that seam. I just kind of lift the fabric up through this little tunnel that's there. And what this foot does is that it turns the fabric twice for us. So it's hemming it as I go. And if you can see, what's coming out on the back end here is a perfectly hemmed sleeve. So this is definitely a game changer. If you're planning to do a lot of narrow hems on some lightweight woven fabrics like this, I would definitely suggest investing in this foot, and just make sure that you're getting the one that fits your specific make and model of sewing machine. Like I said, this is going to take some practice, so definitely if you do get your hands on this foot or you find it in your accessory bin for your machine, I would suggest getting some scrap fabric and practicing before you try it on your actual fabric. Do a couple back stitches right at the underside there on the under part of the armpit. Nice. And I have a beautifully narrow hem finish on my sleeve. Of course, you would give this a nice press once you're done. Now I'm going to grab the other sleeve and repeat the exact same thing to hem the bottom part of this sleeve as well. And you can turn the sleeve right side out if it makes it a little bit easier for you to handle it. Alright, and that is it for video number 6 in the Butterick 6214 video sew-along series. I hope you enjoyed it. No worries, it does not end here. We have another video coming for you. There's a video 7 and a video 8, and then you'll know that you'll be done with the sew-along. So definitely go back and watch this video if you missed any portions of it. If you need a link to the previous 6 or the previous 5 videos in the playlist and you want to watch kind of all the videos in order, make sure that you click the link I've included for you in the description box below, and you can also just do a search for it here on YouTube. But if you enjoyed this video and you're enjoying this sew along, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up below. Share it with any of your crafty friends who are thinking of trying their hand at garment sewing, and go ahead and leave me a comment below letting me know how you feel about this series so far, what you've learned, maybe something new that you picked up in this specific video number 6. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.